Welcome, friend. Follow me. We're going somewhere dark, somewhere dangerous. Most people would never dare enter the place we are going. There's no telling what horrors we'll find, what terrors we'll uncover. Don't say I didn't warn you. We might discover terrible monsters lurking there. Be careful, they could follow you out, or maybe they're already inside you. Are you afraid? Good. Now you are ready to enter the Warning Woods. It took a week to arrange the meeting with the Whitney Brothers at Crystal's house. Drew acted as the point of contact, messaging the popular paranormal investigators through Instagram to plan their rendezvous. During this period, Crystal reviewed all the videos captured by Drew's trail cameras. There was, of course, the uncanny rabbit which had garnered the most attention on his YouTube channel. She found the vampiric snake, or at least she guessed it was the same one, and watched it lunge through the fissure with one of its strange, springing leaps. 2 videos taken in the middle of the night appeared to have been triggered by fast-moving, ill-defined shadows, which could have been natural, but Crystal had a feeling emerged from the fissure as well. Most of the creatures that triggered the cameras looked fairly ordinary, displaying only mildly odd characteristics. The last video Crystal reviewed seemed to show the thing she'd been hoping to find. The clip began with a squirrel, a seemingly ordinary squirrel, scampering along the ground near the fissure. As if sensing the anomaly, it stood up on its hind legs with its back to the camera. Its head twitched back and forth, and Crystal wondered if it was hearing the low rumbling that accompanied the fissure. Did it feel sickly, too? Then, in a flash of indistinct movement, something large materialized mid-air and wrapped itself around the squirrel before both creatures vanished behind a tree at the edge of the screen. Crystal went back and scrubbed frame by frame until she found the very second the new creature began to materialize. Working through the video so slowly allowed her to watch its legs, black and spider-like, emerge first from the fissure. No one frame gave a clear image of the whole creature. Crystal had to squint to try to make out the shape of its body, which appeared very similar to that of a scorpion. Between 2 frames, its barbed tail sunk into the squirrel's stomach. A few frames later, wings reminiscent of a wasp's appeared. In a continuous blur, the creature flew the limp squirrel behind the tree. This creature was the best candidate Crystal had found to be the one that made the structure that resembled a wasp nest on the big tree in the Proudie Woods. Seeing the rapid violence it instilled upon the helpless squirrel made her glad she hadn't stuck around to watch it emerge. The morning the Whitney brothers arrived, Crystal led them and Drew into her living room, where they all started sitting down. Reese Whitney said, "Nice place. You have this all to yourself?" "Yeah, but I don't know if I'd call it nice," Crystal replied, forcing friendly small talk she deplored. The brothers, Reese and Darian, seemed nice enough. However, she worried their buoyant YouTuber personalities could wear thin on her. "We've been living with our parents for over a year," Darian said. "I suppose anything would seem nice after that?" Crystal asked. It's not so bad, honestly," said Darian. "Just embarrassing." Because he could see the doubtful confusion blooming behind Crystal Jennings' eyes, he explained, "YouTube isn't quite as lucrative as most people think. We started the reaction channel we watched Drew's video on to help, and it has, but it's been tough to save enough money to get out on our own again." "I honestly hate doing those reaction videos," Reese said. "No offense, Drew. If your video turns out to be real, again, no offense, it'll be the first so far." "It's real," Drew said, sort of absently. All the star power the brothers lost on Crystal, Drew had found. Sort of snapping to, he said, "I never deleted the recording from the original SD card. I save all the original clips. You can check the metadata and whatever." He phrased this as an offer, not a challenge. Darian said, "We already came all this way, so we'll check out the woods, don't worry. Might get a screenshot of that metadata later to splice into the video, though." Reese laughed. "Now I kinda wish we could tell our audience we checked the metadata before we came so we could seem like real detectives. We honestly just got a vibe and went for it." Darian tisked and shook his head. Crystal asked, "Can't you just say you did anyway? I mean, who's going to know besides me and Drew?" "I wouldn't say anything," Drew promised. Reese and Darian looked at each other before Darian said, "We try not to ever make anything up, even the tiniest detail. I guess we both sort of have a hard time lying anyway, but if anybody caught us making up even the smallest thing, it could discredit our entire channel. We've watched it happen to others. Not saying they were necessarily legit, but we have to protect our credibility because we feel like what we do is important." Reese further explained, "We took a long break from making videos and just got back into it pretty recently. The whole reason we came back is because we know people all over the world experience paranormal experiences, I guess. They need to know what they're dealing with and how to deal with it, and we think we can help them. Bottom line, that's why we're here," said Darian. Crystal began to worry less about these guys getting on her nerves. Honesty and moral consistency went a long way with her. She supposed they could actually be lying to her face right there in her living room, but only time would tell. For the moment, she chose to believe them. She said, "I looked at some of your other stuff, your videos. It looks like most of what you guys have dealt with are ghosts and that kind of thing. Before I take you out to the woods, I have to explain what's happening here. It's not a haunting, okay? Well, I don't want to be dramatic, but it's bigger than that." "We thought investigating a cryptid might be a fun change of pace," said Reese. Darian added, "And still in line with our mission." "There won't be anything fun about this," Crystal said. She looked at Drew, who was staring at the famous brothers like he worried they might run away. "I think I need to tell you guys a story," Crystal said. "It's a bit long, but like you, I promise I'm not someone to make things up. Sadly, I don't really need to." Crystal then told the Whitneys the story of the owl, sparing no detail about the carnage or the extent to which her own mistakes allowed it. She let that story lead her into the even less believable story of what happened after she joined the Homeworld Protection Agency and what occurred with Commander Graham in the Warning Woods. When she described being pushed into the fissure there, she received a welcome surprise. Darian Whitney cut in to say, "I've been there too. I've seen that place you're talking about." Crystal said, "Really?" And both brothers nodded. Darian then shared the story of how he switched places with the spirit of a woman from the past and how Reese almost couldn't get him back. He described the place his spirit was trapped during this ordeal, how all the colors seemed to be inverted there and everyone appeared to have glowing auras. "I couldn't really see anything that specific," Crystal said. "It all looked and felt really abstract." "Well," said Darian, "I'm speculating, but from your story, it sounds like you literally went to this fifth dimension, like, physically. For me, it was like a part of me went there, just my spirit or consciousness or whatever. Maybe my soul. Maybe since my body was still here, that changed something about how I saw it." "That's really interesting. I never heard about that," Drew said. "We didn't post the video," Reese replied. "I thought he was going to talk about the Hotel Moss," said Drew. Something big happened there, didn't it?" he pried. Crystal asked, "What's the Hotel Moss?" Reese and Darian then proceeded to tell Crystal about their experience in the infamous hotel and how Darian risked his life and potentially his soul by crossing through what they described as a portal opened by the evil spirit of the hotel's founder. "So, based on what you've told us and the two different experiences I've had," Darian said at the end, "I think there's different ways to access the fifth dimension, but they're not all equal." "I can't tell you how relieving it is to have this conversation," Crystal said. "I hadn't come to that conclusion yet, but I felt like there's something different going on here in Proudie than what I saw in the Warning Woods. Something else that's different is the stuff that appears here. I haven't seen all of it, obviously, but just based on what I have seen, these things seem able to sort of copy themselves. In Nebraska, I dealt with these things called decoracs that laid eggs, but I learned at the HPA that that's extremely rare. Yet somehow, out of the two creatures I've dealt with here, both could reproduce, and their entire motivation seemed driven by doing that." "Like it was their purpose," Darian stated, didn't ask. "Oh, he's about to get into his big thesis," said Reese. Crystal leaned forward. Darian said, I think everything has a purpose. Like people too, but I think we're all connected to the fifth dimension whether we know it or not. I think the forces over there have a powerful influence over things here, and I think certain forces are, by nature, parasitic. We've dealt with human spirits like that, but maybe there are other things too. What we've dealt with, what you've dealt with, they all have one major thing in common. They all want to stay here, to exist here. You've seen things feed off people to reproduce. We've seen spirits take over hosts firsthand. Hell, it happened to you, Reese butt in. Darian continued, what if the difference between what we've dealt with and what you've seen here is they're not here to take over a human's body, but to take over the earth instead? Crystal looked out her front window, which faced the Proudie Woods. She thought about the bizarre wasp nest growing out there, still waiting to be examined. She thought about the rabbit creature Drew captured on his trail cam, still on the loose, and she thought about the vampire snake she'd crushed under her van. All of these creatures had something else in common she'd not considered. They were all smaller, stealthier than the owl. Along the lines of how Darian was thinking, they could be the evolving adaptations of a parasitic virus. So, if they're a virus and the Earth is its intended host, she said, still staring out the window in thought, Proudie is what? The point of contact? So we have to treat it here before it spreads. Guys, I'm not sure. This might be too big for us. Reese said, before we make any judgments like that, I'd like to at least— What I mean is, Crystal interrupted, is it irresponsible for us to keep this to ourselves? What if we fail? What if it gets out of hand and it's too late to do anything about it? What do we do, though? Go to the mayor? Asked Drew. The police chief already thinks you're crazy. The Whitneys gave Crystal two versions of the same surprised expression. She nodded to confirm Drew's statement. Before she spoke, something Brian Sinclair told her on the phone came to mind. Put together a team of people you can trust. You're going to need other people to help ground you if you take this on. While she still didn't feel comfortable with the idea of taking on a supernatural force with an Uber driver and a couple of YouTubers, Drew had indirectly made an excellent point. At least, what he'd said translated this way in her mind. This isn't something we can just turn over for the authorities to handle. There is no authority over this stuff. If there ever was, I was a part of it. Once, she had been a young girl who dreamt of being a police officer to fight the injustice of the world. The sense that she could do something that really mattered, not just to herself but to her community and the individuals who made it up, drove her to be a straight-A student, top of her class at the Law Enforcement Academy, and the fittest, fastest, and most determined officer in the Proudie PD. Could that same motivation, she wondered, be enough to drive her toward success even when the stakes were so existential? But then came the doubts. Nebraska, the Deckerax, Sam the veterinarian, the researcher Dr. Clem Bunting, and a fellow agent named Petra Cole, the dead, the wounded. Should she really try to lead another team in battle against the strange forces behind the fissures? She and the Whitney brothers appeared to be about the same age, but they seemed so innocent despite the terrifying things they had witnessed and been a part of. And Drew hadn't asked for any of this. He was just a curious guy who stumbled upon the greatest and possibly most important mystery of all time. Crystal knew she was the obvious choice to lead them, but could she handle the responsibility of protecting them when the things inevitably got dangerous? Could she survive the guilt if she failed? You're right, she told Drew about the mayor and the police. But if we're going to try to take this on, I need to make sure you all understand the risks. This sort of stuff can go sideways fast. It can get deadly before you even know it. To Reese and Darian, she said, no offense, but these things aren't shadows and bumps in the night. They have teeth and claws. They can kill you. It wouldn't be the first time our lives were at risk, but I get what you're saying, Reese replied. Darian said, I feel like we could keep talking circles around this all day. Maybe we should just go see for ourselves. Drew, I want to see where those videos came from. That's where the fissure is, right? Yeah, we can do that, said Drew. Darian said, All right then, let's go. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement this season on Prize Picks, where it's good to be right. I'm looking here at, Josh Allen for 27.5 rush yards. I'm going to go more. Or Dalton Kincaid for 30.5 receiving yards. I've got a friend who's a Bills superfan. I might check with him about that one. Let's see if I can even outperform last week's picks. Prize Picks also offers injury reboots. If one of your players leaves the game in the first half and doesn't return, Prize Picks won't count it as a loss. Prize Picks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Download the app today and use code WarningWoods to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code WarningWoods to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Everyone drove separately to the trailhead at the Proudie Woods. They arrived just before 4 p.m., which left them plenty of daylight to conduct an initial investigation of the area. They held awkward conversations about where everyone was from, when they graduated high school, and the weather, as the Whitney brothers unloaded and donned their camera gear. For this excursion, they chose 2 GoPro cameras strapped to their heads and a single handheld they explained could be passed around the group as needed. Crystal offered to hold it first, hoping to perhaps use its zoom to take a closer look at the bizarre wasp nest down the trail. "I want to set your expectations before we go in," Crystal said as she shouldered her own backpack near the entrance to the woods. "Is that recording?" Reese asked, pointing to the camera in her hand. "We try to get everything." Crystal hit record, then repeated, "I want to set expectations before we go in. I know Drew's channel shows a few of these creatures, or whatever you want to call them, but most people around here have never seen any. Apparently, they've started to appear slightly more often, but overall, sightings are still pretty rare." "The fissure is what I really want to see," Darian said. "If it's like what we've seen before, but more powerful or whatever, I want to know that before we really get into the... I don't even know what to call it." Reese guessed. "Investigation? Mission?" Crystal winced internally. A mission required a leader, and again she struggled to see any version of this team where she would not automatically be assigned that role, a role she would never have asked for after what happened in Nebraska. "I like mission," said Drew. "Feels cool." "Okay, hang on," Crystal said, feeling no choice but to say something that would undoubtedly mark her as the unofficial leader despite her misgivings. "I get that this is for YouTube and all, and it does feel pretty cool to be on the cutting edge of the mysteries of the universe, but please, please do not forget what's really at stake. Drew, you and I almost got killed back in 2020, and a lot of people we know did die. It was horrific. After that, I lost 4 years of my life to a fissure, and I almost didn't make it out. If anything had gone differently, I'd still be floating around out there. We don't know where most of the stuff you caught on camera went, except for that snake thing that attacked me, and we won't have any cars to crush them with out here." She raised the corner of her shirt to reveal her pistol, then continued. "This is all we've got, and if we come across anything bullets can't stop, we have to run. I mean, run. Seriously, if I say we need to leave, we leave. Everyone understand?" "You got it," Reese replied. Drew and Darian nodded in agreement. "All right then," said Crystal. "Here we go." With that, she turned toward the woods and started down the trail. They moved at a slow pace so the Whitney brothers could record their commentary as they walked through the woods. They asked Drew and Crystal to introduce themselves on camera, which Crystal declined to do. She didn't want her identity included just yet, or maybe not at all. She stopped the group a few yards back from the wasp nest, telling them to wait there while she jogged ahead to make sure the yet unseen creature or creatures within it hadn't emerged yet. "While we wait," Reese said, unshouldering his pack, "let's do some testing." "What are you getting out?" Darian asked, swinging his camera to point at his brother. "Well," Reese began, "there's definitely something that feels strange out here, but I wonder if that's just because we've been set up to feel like that. To see if there really is a paranormal energy out here." "I'm feeling it too," Darian interrupted. Reese made an excited face at the camera and said, "Well, that's a good sign." Anyway, let's try one of the EMF readers. These things aren't the most reliable ghost hunting tool out there. They're easy to trick, but we're in the middle of the woods, so theoretically... Reese already had the tapered rectangle device in his hand and turned it on. He held his phone up to the camera, then tested the EMF reader against it. A high-pitched tone squealed out of the device, and a row of small lights along the top of it jumped up to red when it came within an inch of the phone, then fell to the green zone when he separated the two again. "All right, it's working," he said. "Let's check this place out." "Give one to Drew," Darian said. Reese dug in his backpack for a second EMF reader identical to the first and gave it to Drew, who took it and held it out awkwardly in front of himself. "Like this?" he asked. "Perfect," said Reese. Drew turned in place until suddenly the lights all shot to red and the device emitted a high, whining tone. He looked up at the woods and realized he was oriented toward the fissure, still too distant to see or hear, but apparently not too far away for its electromagnetic signature to be detected. "Oh, you got something," Reese congratulated. Drew, unsmiling, said, "That's where we're going. That's where the fissure is." Reese experimented by leaving his backpack on the ground beside the others and stepping away to point his own reader in the same direction. He achieved the same result, which Darian captured on camera. "It's powerful," Darian noted for the viewers. Far ahead on the trail, they heard Crystal's voice call to them that it was safe to continue onward. Reese stuck his EMF reader in his pocket without powering it off while he donned his backpack again. Drew continued holding his reader near his stomach and scanning back and forth with it. The three of them followed the trail until Reese suddenly stopped. Drew and Darian saw Crystal standing a few yards ahead, then saw what made Reese pause. Climbing a tall tree that hung over the path was a gigantic, papery tube. It branched into a bunch of smaller tubes that ran underneath some of the tree's larger limbs, including the thickest one that jutted out directly above the trail. Under this branch, Crystal stood, holding a finger to her lips and beckoning them onward. Drew hesitantly pointed his EMF reader at the nest and saw the lights jump past the orange middle into the beginning of the red zone. He quickly pointed the device downward before it emitted its high, warning tone. His eyes caught the device sticking out of Reese's pocket at the same time. As Reese progressed down the trail, the lights on his reader were creeping further and further into the red. "Hey," Drew whispered as loudly as he dared. Darian turned to him, but Reese, engrossed in filming the nest, didn't hear him. The last red light on his reader glowed. He took one more step, and the high, whining tone screamed from his pocket. The noise startled Crystal, who didn't know what it was, and Reese, who didn't expect it. Darian lunged forward to grab the device out of his brother's pocket and quickly shut it off. Crystal sprinted further ahead while silently urging everyone to follow her. They heeded her and moved swiftly toward her new position. Once they paused again, they heard why Crystal had moved them away from the tube. A deep buzzing came from within the trunk of the tube in a rhythmic burst, slowly moving upward. "What is that?" Darian whispered to Crystal. "I still don't know," she whispered back, "but I'm pretty sure it's something that came out of the fissure." "There's a clip you might have seen on my channel," Drew said. "It shows a squirrel getting attacked by something that moves so fast you never get a good look at it." "We saw that one," Reese replied, looking warily over his shoulder at the nest. Drew said, "We're pretty sure what's in there killed that squirrel." The Whitney brothers nodded, and Reese said, "Let's get away from it then. Keep going?" He looked pale, and his face made a painful expression. "You okay?" Darian asked him. Reese nodded, but only slightly. "Just feel a little weird, like kinda dizzy and a bit nauseous." "It's the fissure," Crystal whispered. "For some reason, I'm practically immune, but that probably has to do with being through one before. My body's adapted. Everyone else says it makes them feel sick." "Drew?" "Yeah, I'm holding it together, but not feeling great," Drew replied. "Huh," said Darian. "Besides a bit of anxiety, I feel mostly okay. I suppose that supports your theory, Crystal." Crystal nodded. We're almost there. Let's keep going. Everyone feeling okay? Reese asked a few minutes later as Crystal led them around a sharp bend in the path. A low hum buzzed in his ears, and he still felt like he might vomit. You'll be okay if you just keep pressing on and ignore it, Drew said. It's like a churning, Reese stammered before suddenly turning off the trail. He braced himself with one hand against a tree and heaved. Nothing came out at first, but everyone looked away from him when streaks of brown liquid started pouring out of his mouth. That's embarrassing, he said when he finished. To Crystal, he asked, Did that happen your first time too? She saw his hopeful smile and wanted to tell him it had, but in truth, besides a slight aching in her head from the fissure's low-frequency hum, she hadn't felt sick. It seems to hit everyone differently, she said, answering without being specific. Then Drew turned and threw up in the bushes. Darian looked at Crystal and chuckled. He asked both Drew and Reese, neither directly, Did that help? A little, said Reese. Now let's hurry up and get to this thing before it happens again. No need to hurry, said Crystal. We're basically here. They finished rounding the bend and saw another turn 20 yards ahead, but another couple of dozen yards beyond that, the air seemed to shimmer with transparent colors like a rainbow in a fine mist. It stretched too far in either direction to judge how far it reached. Make sure you're still recording, Reese told Darian. I don't want any chance of somebody claiming this is a camera glitch or a lighting trick if it's just on one camera. I'm getting it too, Crystal said, viewing the fissure through the handheld camera they'd given her. Although not as prominent as it appeared with the naked eye, the fissure still showed up faintly on the digital camera at the right angle. It's weird to look at it knowing what it is, Drew said. He pointed to the side at a well-camouflaged trail camera no one else had noticed and said, That's the one that caught that rabbit thing. Reese stepped up to examine the trail cam. He said, So this is what brought us all the way out here, huh? Take the SD card if you want, Drew replied. If you need it to prove anything, I mean. I don't think we need any more proof than this, Darian muttered almost to himself. He stared into the fissure, reaching into it with his gaze. He asked Crystal, Do you know if anyone, do you think it's safe to... No, absolutely not, Crystal cut him off. You want to go through it? Reese asked, appalled. Darian said, I just want to look at what's in there now that I have a better understanding of what it is. I mean, the whole idea is that the fifth dimension, what's beyond that thing, is really all around us anyway, right? We just can't see or touch it. Going through that thing should just be like putting on a pair of VR goggles, right? It's not, Crystal answered. You've seen what comes out of that. Those things are over there too, just in their native forms. God only knows what they could do to you. Plus, there's the time dilation. We have no idea when you'd come back. Stay in there a few minutes and you could be gone for days or even years. Are you sure that's the same with every fissure? Darian asked. Reese added, Yeah, why hasn't that happened to Darian either of the times he's gone over before? Crystal thought for a minute, but it was Drew who came up with the winning conclusion first. He said, Darian, the first time, and we've already talked about this, I know, but the first time you were over there was just your, consciousness, right? And the second time your whole body and mind went through, but Reese, didn't you say you pulled him back? Darian said, He held on to me up till the last second. I was only over there without him touching me for a second or two. Right, said Drew. What if you don't get affected by the time dilation if you're still in contact with the physical world? Darian snapped with his right hand and pointed at Drew, looking at him with astonishment. Dude, you just nailed it, he said. The fissures aren't portals to somewhere else, they're separations between the physical and intangible dimensions. So, by that logic, if you literally stay in touch with the physical world, you can be in touch with the other one without drifting away, Crystal finished. She'd gone fully into the fissure in the Warning Woods without any remaining contact with Earth. It was a miracle she still sweated about that she made it back at all. Okay, so now what? Asked Reese. Well, said Darian, I have an idea, but I'm not sure it'll be worthwhile. The nausea's starting to come back, so let's hurry up and hear it, Reese replied. Drew nodded his agreement. Okay. Darian shrugged off his backpack and quickly retrieved a small metal box that reminded Crystal of a portable tape player her mom kept on her dresser until it finally quit working. This, Darian explained, is called a spirit box. Great band, Drew impulsively remarked, quickly withdrawing in embarrassment. But Darian gave him a fist bump that brought him back out. Great band indeed, said Darian. But this is actually the device their name comes from. It allows spirits to talk to us through radio signals. Essentially, they can use words selected from the radio to communicate with us. Crystal said, Seems sketchy? Asked Reese. I agree, it does. But trust me, this thing has worked amazingly for us before. It's kind of something you have to see to believe. All right, said Crystal. Show me. Darian sat himself cross-legged on the duff, leaning on his backpack with the spirit box in front of him. He started to say, So how this works is one of us asks a question, then... As he said, then, he pushed the power switch on the side of the box. The rest of what he was going to say never left his lips. He was cut short by a torrent of broken radio broadcasts sporadically bursting from the device's speaker. Every second a new voice broke through, but changed before the foursome could make out any message. Try resetting it, Reese yelled over the noise. Can you turn it down? Crystal asked at the same time. Darian fumbled with the box, deciding just to switch it off after a few seconds. The woods felt twice as quiet after the box went silent. Something's wrong with it, Darian said. It's never done that before, and the volume wasn't turned up very high at all. It's like it's acting on its own. Bad batteries? Reese asked. Darian said, I just changed them before we came here. Try again. But be ready to shut it off if it does that again, Crystal added. With a nod to her, Darian set the box down again. His finger lingered on the switch, and with a thoughtful expression on his face, he said, Let me try asking a question before I turn it on. Let's see. Reese said, Try this. Are there any human spirits in these woods? The red power indicator light at the top of the spirit box glowed before Darian hit the switch. Once more, voices cycled out of its speaker at top volume, but this time they were not broken bits of broadcasts. They were screaming, crying, howling voices that belonged to men, women, and children. Not one voice said anything coherent before the next came through. They all just screamed. It sounded like hell. Shut it off, Crystal commanded, her hand rising toward the pistol under her shirt as she scanned the surrounding woods. I can't, cried Darian. She looked down and saw his finger sliding the power switch back and forth. The blaring box stayed on and continued to project scream after scream. Give it to me, Reese demanded. Darian seemed happy to turn the box over to someone else. Reese took it and popped the battery compartment in the back open. With a hard smack, he knocked 2 of the device's 3 AA batteries out of the back, instantly silencing its speaker. What the hell? Crystal growled. She looked and sounded genuinely angry. I'm sorry, that's never happened before, said Darian. Crystal asked, whispering, What is that thing really, some YouTube gimmick? No, it's worked before, Reese promised. I even talked through it when I was on the other side, Darian added. Hey guys, be quiet, Drew hissed. He ducked behind a tree, turning his ear in the direction of the trail. Everyone else copied him before they even knew why. Something disrupted the leaves on a nearby branch. With all other sounds in the woods silenced, the subtle movements of something above them whispered clearly through the trees. Crystal soundlessly tossed Drew her camera. She drew her gun, wrapped both hands around it, and held it at the ready. Total stillness fell over the woods. The group could hear each other breathing softly through slightly parted lips, their lungs attempting to offload some of the tension and stress injected in them by the complete silence. Crystal peeked around her tree, revealing as little of her face as possible to the interwoven branches above. Many had lost the majority of their leaves, so she thought anything perched up there should be easy to spot. It remained hidden, though, whatever watched from up there. She heard a sharp intake of breath from Drew. She looked at him without moving her head and saw he'd pointed the camera above her. He'd clearly spotted something which horrified him. She drew in a deep breath and braced herself. The Whitney brothers noticed the same thing, and both of their eyes grew wide. They simultaneously pointed above Crystal's head, but remained quiet. Drew beckoned her to come toward them. Crystal knew if she didn't want to be surprised, she had to be the surpriser. Without knowing what waited above her, she racked her pistol and barrel-rolled sideways, aiming upward as she twisted her body around. She fired 4 blind shots into the orange and brown leaves above her. With a deep and aggressive buzzing, the scorpion wasp rose from its hidden perch. "Run!" Crystal screamed. The group scattered. She fired 2 more shots at the giant bug before scrambling to her own feet and taking off as well. She nearly ran headlong into the fissure. This mistake cost her a few critical steps, which she almost paid for with her life. The wasp dove at her, missing with its curved stinger by inches. It landed in a tree just beyond her, where its stinger stuck. Crystal took full advantage of the opportunity to distance herself from the creature, but unfortunately lost sight of it in the process. She listened as best as she could over her own footsteps for any sounds made by the others. She could hear their distant footfalls, but the sounds echoed through the trees from too far away for her to pinpoint. It sounded like they could have been coming from almost any direction. It would turn out all 3 men had split in different directions, although none came as close as Crystal to accidentally stepping through the fissure. Reese looked over his shoulder and could see Darian not too far off. He shouted to signal to his brother to join him. After his brother caught up, he panted, "Do you have any sort of—" Darian filled in. "Weapons? No, nothing. If it gets close, we'll just have to throw stuff at it." Without losing a step, Reese reached down and picked up a thick, short stick, one he could use for melee or throw at any incoming targets. "Did we lose the others?" Darian asked. He looked back. He could not see Crystal or Drew anywhere amongst the trees they left behind. Reese said, "Maybe they got ahead of us." Darian said, "Okay, but if we get back to the trail and still can't see them, we have to double back." "Sure," Reese agreed, anxious to keep moving. They waded through thinning brush and bushes that slowed them down. They knew if they continued in the same general direction, they would eventually find the trail again, but had no idea how far ahead it would be due to the bend they'd followed before reaching the fissure and the uneven ground. "You smell that?" Darian asked, jogging to close the remaining distance between he and Reese. Reese answered, "Yeah, I thought it was just a side effect from the fissure thing. I started smelling it way back there." "Smells like something died." "Well, it is the Oh God, Darian, hold up." Reese beckoned him to follow him toward the right. He moved quickly, stooping low. Darian mimicked him. "Is that a deer?" Darian asked as they reached a mutilated carcass on the ground. Most of its head had been chewed down to the bone, including its eyes. By the shape of its body, the brothers determined it was a young deer. Its belly hung open. It looked like a carelessly torn envelope, and the innards which had spilled out of it looked chewed and rotten. Reese said, "It's just a deer, D. Let's keep moving." But Darian held up a hand. He whispered, "There's something else here. I'm not sure what, but..." He reached over and pulled the protruding EMF reader from Reese's pants pocket. He turned it on, pointed it at the dead deer, and looked fearfully toward Reese when the lights immediately jumped to orange. One step closer was all it took to jump the lights into red and cause the high-pitched whine to emit. Darian quickly shut off the device, killing the noise, but it was too late. The sound reverberated through the trees. The deer carcass in front of them twitched. "Oh, hell no," Reese whispered. Darian yelled, "Run!" The boys turned just as the carcass's stomach flapped open. Out charged the uncanny rabbit creature which had brought them there. It bared 2 vampiric front teeth with rows of sharp incisors behind them as it screamed a piercing shriek. Out from behind the rabbit poured a small horde of miniature clones, all soaked in blood and gore. The Whitney brothers ran. Crystal cleared each tree she passed on her way back to the trail. Following this habitual procedure kept her mind focused and her body in sync. Otherwise, she might have panicked. She'd witnessed how quietly the scorpion wasp could move, and it had infinite places to hide. She prayed it was still tracking her and not any of the others. At least she had a gun, which the others did not. She paused again to listen for anyone else, thinking she would move towards them if she knew where to go. Everyone else, it seemed, had wisely chosen to be silent. She wondered if they had, like her, picked up on the fact that twice now it was sound that disturbed and attracted the aggressive bug. She pivoted around a thick tree when, farther in the woods than she would have expected, she heard Darian Whitney yell, "Run!" Nowhere in her mind did it occur to her that he and whoever he yelled to might be running from something other than the wasp. She gave up her effort to keep quiet and charged through the trees toward Darian's voice. It had been loud enough that, even though it echoed, it had a clear focal point. She nearly ran out of breath despite her excellent conditioning, cutting between trees, jumping over logs and shrubbery, running in such a high state of alarm. These factors all wore her down more quickly than she expected. The straps of her backpack felt like they were cutting into her damp t-shirt and rubbing her shoulders raw. She burst between two bushes coated in decaying leaves and stopped. She'd found the wasp. It didn't seem to notice her at first. It crawled over the top of a mound of papery material that matched its nest, just a little fresher and more pliable, more like clay than paper. The mound, though rather shapeless, was roughly the size of an adult human. Beside it, she saw the handheld camera she'd passed to Drew, still powered on and still recording. Before the wasp had a chance to notice her, Crystal started shooting, being careful not to fire any shots into the gray mound. Even as she aimed and pulled the trigger, she found herself battling a thought which attempted to intrude upon her mind. The wasp's mound looked so similar to the human-sized pellets which had earned the owl its moniker back in 2020. She knew what had been discovered inside those pellets. Perhaps whatever lay encased in the wasp's mound was not one of the men she'd entered the woods with, but she could take no chances. The scorpion wasp turned toward her and attempted to fly at her with its tail curled over its head, but when it tried to take flight, it found that one of Crystal's bullets had pierced its left wing. It fluttered a few feet above the mound before crashing down on top of it. A second bullet clipped the end of its tail, knocking it back as a greenish-gray substance bled out of it. The wasp charged at her on foot, moving faster than Crystal expected. She fired 2 misses before the creature reached her. She kicked at it, then ran in the least obstructed direction, back toward the fissure. Reese and Darian heard gunshots far behind them but could not spare any energy interpreting them. The horde of rabbit creatures remained close on their heels. The largest, the mother, led the pack of between 10 and 15 smaller clones. Whenever the mother shrieked its chilling cry, the little ones echoed with a chorus of higher and shriller sounds. They made these noises frequently enough to give the fleeing brothers the beginnings of a headache. The insides of their ears stung as they tried to look for some way to escape. So far, all either of them could think was to run all the way back to the cars and put solid metal between them and their hungry pursuers. "Hey, look," Reese huffed, pointing crosswise in front of Darian. Darian noted the tree his brother wanted him to see. It was a pine, thick with needles but with branches low enough for them to climb. "Think they can climb?" he asked Reese. This seemed pertinent, but Reese just shrugged. How was he to know? He and Darian could either climb or run until their legs gave out, which would be soon. So when Reese turned to angle toward the pine tree, Darian followed him. "Drop your pack," he suggested as they reached the tree. He and Reese both shrugged their backpacks off and let them fall to the ground. Reese hesitantly let go of his stick also. Dry needles poked every exposed inch of their skin as they wriggled close to the trunk where the branches looked strongest. As he climbed, Darian huffed, "We need Crystal." "That was her shooting back there, right?" Reese asked. "I hope so," said Darian. The screeching baby creatures encircled the trunk and started biting it, ripping out chunks of bark with their small, strong teeth. The mother waited just beyond the tree's branches, watching the brothers ascend. "Do you have anything left on you?" Reese asked. Darian shook his head. The rabbits below appeared to unite and all bunched together, chewing through one side of the tree's skinny trunk. It would take time, but if they didn't tire out, it was entirely conceivable that they could cut the whole thing down. Looking into the patient eyes of the watching mother, Darian yelled, "Crystal!" Though Crystal tried many times to turn herself back toward the trail, the terrain drove her ever closer to the fissure until she began to worry she might run into it. The wasp's flightlessness barely slowed it down. It maneuvered through and around every obstacle, gaining on her as her energy depleted. Whenever it got too close, she shot at it half blindly, never able to stop long enough to aim without it catching her. An old, hollow tree had fallen directly in her path, its trunk so thick it came up to her hips. In the time it took her to clamber over the massive tree, the wasp closed what little distance remained between them. Crystal fell off the tree, spinning around to fire what should have been a direct hit, but the trigger drew back too easily. Lying there on her back, Crystal realized the gun's slide had never closed after her last shot. The chamber was empty, and so was the magazine. The wasp charged over the top of the tree trunk and launched itself on top of her, stinger poised for impact. Crystal coiled up and punched its underside with her empty gun, touching, for the first time, an exoskeleton she wasn't sure a bullet could have pierced anyway. She wondered if she had actually hit the wasp any of the times she shot at it while fleeing and her bullets had simply done nothing to harm it. Well, she knew its wings were delicate enough to damage, and although they were already useless, she rolled on top of the wasp after knocking it aside and pinned its tail with one of her shins. She used the empty gun to punch holes in the uninjured wing while holding it in place with her free hand. The creature hissed and writhed beneath her, clacking its pointed jaws. She was hurting it, or at least angering it. Perhaps it would have fled if she let it go, but she could not release it. That would only create a problem for another day. But she had to do something quickly. She wasn't sure how long whoever was trapped inside the mound could survive. If they're still alive, she thought. She let go of the wasp's wing and reached for its trapped stinger. The segmented tail twisted away from her when she touched it. Once, the stinger snapped towards her elbow and she only barely avoided its tip coated in dried poison. After this, she shifted to put more weight on its tail and shifted her focus to the wasp's head. She flipped the gun around in her hand and smashed one of the wasp's large black eyes with the grip. It caved in with a crackling squelch. The creature bucked with fury. Crystal's legs slipped and she felt the deadly tail shift beneath her. Rather than try to reclaim her hold on it, she feared her position was too far gone. She dove away, hoping the injuries she caused would be enough to slow the wasp down. They were not. It pursued her with renewed hostility, now hissing and clacking as it closed the distance. Crystal could now hear the fissure's hum, but kept running straight because to turn would cost her speed she could not afford to lose. If she had to dive into the fissure to escape, could she? She wondered. Would it be worth a couple of years to get away from this thing? What of the person in the mound, though? Would the others be able to help them in time? Well, she thought, if the other option is being killed, that won't help anyone either. The shimmering fissure appeared before her sooner than she expected, forcing her to make a slight adjustment to her course. Still, the wasp drew nearer. The sounds of its 6 or 8 legs, Crystal hadn't been given a chance to count, tore through the dead leaves on the ground, making constant noise. Then, suddenly, the noises stopped. Crystal didn't look back. The wasp landed on her backpack with staggering force. She tried to remain on her feet, but one of her ankles twisted when she attempted to catch herself. She dropped to one knee as the wasp's legs wrapped around her arms, clawing into her clothing and cutting her skin with the sharp barbs at their ends. Crystal cried out as she attempted to stand again. Her only saving grace was the wasp's fixed neck did not allow its clacking jaws to reach her neck. They instead pointed straight upward, clicking hungrily behind her. Pure instinct saved her when the wasp's tail suddenly jutted up between her legs. Its stinger nearly pierced her stomach before her hands wrapped around it, halting it in place. Even using both hands, she found it difficult to push the stinger away. She could feel the slick tail beginning to slip through her grip. She knew she was about to lose. In a final act of desperation, she pushed herself back on her feet. This action nearly allowed the stinger to slip through her hands, but she held fast, turned toward the fissure, and ran straight for it. Mere steps away from the shimmering air, she heard a sound cut above the fissure's low hum. It was Darian, screaming her name. He sounded desperate and terrified. Barely able to stop herself before charging into the portal, Crystal spun on her heels, putting her back to it. She needed another plan. She needed to... The weight on her back began to lift. The strength of the tail she gripped in her hands waned. The clacking jaws behind her quieted, then faded away altogether. Now the air behind her started to pull at her hair, even the smallest ones on the back of her neck. She felt the wasp's tail begin pulling away from her instead of pushing, so she let go. With her freed hands, she loosed the barbed legs from her clothes and shoved them off, and when she turned around, she watched a fading ripple in the fissure swallow the pointed tip of the scorpion wasp's stinger. She couldn't believe it. The wasp was gone, sent to another space and time where it could, hopefully, harm no one. The mother rabbit continued eyeing the Whitney brothers from the ground as they clung to the middle of the tree. Since the babies hadn't made any attempts to climb, only gnawed at the base of the tree, the brothers didn't try to climb any higher either. The tree already felt flimsy where they were perched. "Do you think Crystal and Drew already got out?" Reese asked, scanning the surrounding woods for any sign of their companions. Darian said, "I don't know, but if they don't show up soon, we're gonna have to figure something out." He looked down at the small creatures feverishly chewing through the base of the trunk. He found it difficult to see how far they had cut into it from directly above, but based on the amount of wet wood shavings surrounding them, he guessed they'd made significant progress. As if confirming this, the trunk groaned, vibrating under the brothers' hands. Darian drew in a breath to shout for help again, but another loud sound superseded his voice. A single gunshot rang out through the trees, much louder and deeper than Crystal's pistol. The mother rabbit flew sideways at least 2 feet before landing on the ground, sprawled motionless in an immediate pool of blood. The cluster of babies under the tree dissolved. They scurried in every direction, running in jerky, patternless panic. "Careful," Reese warned as Darian hurried down the tree, unsure how much longer it could stand. Reese followed more delicately, not wanting their actions to be what finally knocked the tree down. A woman neither of them had ever seen emerged from behind a tree holding a bolt-action rifle. She appeared to be in her 60s, but was fit enough to move with ease across the uneven ground. "Who are you? Where's Crystal?" the woman asked sternly. Darian said, We're not sure. We all got separated." "All?" the woman asked. Reese said, "A guy named Drew was in here with us." "Drew Harrison?" "Yeah." "Are there more of those things around?" the woman asked. Picking up his backpack, Darian said, "We don't know. There was a wasp thing back there that split us up. We heard gunshots coming from that way, though. Which way did you come from?" "I just followed the trail until I heard you two. I'm Rose, by the way. I'm a friend of Crystal's." "So you didn't see Crystal or Drew on your way in?" Reese asked, somewhat rhetorically, as he calculated what this could mean. Rose said, "You're the first human beings I've come across. I'm assuming those weren't typical rabbits?" The brothers shook their heads. Rose said, "Okay, follow me. Let's go find the others." Crystal's head jerked up when she heard the unmistakable boom of a rifle in the near distance. No one else in their group had a gun as far as she knew, which meant someone else had entered the woods with them. Labrie? Or maybe he'd sent an officer? Someone must have heard her shooting, she supposed. The distant gunshot was far from her main concern at the moment, though. Unable to find Reese and Darian, she'd returned to the gray mound built by the scorpion wasp and, carefully, cut it open from the top. When she'd peeled it back, it cracked without fully coming apart like an eggshell. Inside, she'd found Drew Harrison, still and swollen, eyes shut. His skin was not quite colorless, but certainly faded. Covering his arms, face, neck, and the portion of his belly exposed by his slightly raised shirt were strange white polyps the size of baseballs. After checking Drew's pulse and finding one, soft but even, Crystal tugged one of the polyps to try to remove it. It wouldn't let go. It seemed to have hooks under his skin, and she feared if she pulled any harder she would tear off a piece of him. While she watched, she noticed individual polyps pulsing slightly. They looked alive, and they were feeding off of Drew. They needed to be removed fast, probably surgically, but Crystal didn't know how to get him out of the woods. Drew, can you hear me?" she asked, patting the top of his head where the polyps had not attached, maybe due to his thick hair. Drew groaned and partially opened his eyes. Crystal kept patting him, saying, "Hey, stay awake from me. Stay awake, Drew, okay? I'm going to get you help. Do you hurt anywhere?" His eyes opened the rest of the way, looking vacant and dull. His lips parted slightly, and Crystal was horrified to see something white behind his teeth. She grabbed his chin and pulled it down, opening his jaw a little more. At least one polyp was attached to the roof of his mouth. "Oh my God, Drew," she groaned. Then she noticed red swelling on his belly underneath the polyps there. This, she guessed, was where the wasp had stung him, immobilizing him to turn him into a nest. In the same direction as the gunshot, she heard familiar voices calling for her. It sounded like Darian and Reese and... Rose? "Over here, hurry!" she shouted back. If there were 4 of them, she imagined they might be able to carry Drew out, but did he have enough time left? He seemed to be fading before her eyes. His eyes closed again, and he paused for multiple seconds between shallow breaths. First Darian appeared, then Reese, and even though Crystal could not comprehend how or why, Rose followed close behind them, carrying a hunting rifle. "It's Drew," Crystal shouted to Rose. "He needs help." "The rest of the department is on their way," Rose shouted back. "I called them when I heard gunshots, told them to get paramedics on the way too." They surrounded Drew. "What is this?" Rose gasped, eyeing the infestation covering Drew's skin. Reese pried at a piece of the gray husk Crystal had peeled off of Drew with his foot. He looked at Crystal with silent questions behind his eyes. "The wasp thing did this," Crystal told everyone. "I found him wrapped up in this cocoon thing, and when I opened it, he was covered in these... I assume there's some sort of embryo or something." "They look so alive," Darian said. Crystal nodded. "They're feeding on him. We need to figure out how to carry him out of here." Rose shook her head. "Crystal, I think we should wait. Look at him, Rose. We can't sit here and wait for help to find us." Rose looked toward the trail, listening for sounds of incoming help. So deep in the woods, any approaching sirens were deadened by the trees. She looked back at Drew, then toward the trail again, seeming to wrestle with an unannounced decision. Finally, she said, "I'll go meet them at the trailhead and bring them straight here." "I'm not sure you should go off on your own," Reese pointed out. He knew there might be other creatures lurking in the woods, least of all the escaped baby rabbits, and the sun was just beginning to set. Darian touched Crystal's upper arm, gently, and leaned in close to her. He took advantage of the brief exchange between Reese and Rose, which followed Reese's comment, to privately whisper, "I have an idea, but it's going to sound insane." Crystal whispered back, "Hit me." In few words, spoken as quickly as possible, Darian outlined a plan which twisted Crystal's stomach, but sounded like it just might save Drew's fading life. Convincing the others to participate could be impossible, though. Darian's plan went against everything both he and Crystal had warned their group about. Crystal considered the alternative, though, standing around waiting for a medical team who would certainly, have no idea what they were looking at or how to deal with it, and decided to present the plan to the others anyway. "Darian's got an idea," she announced. Darian gave her a nod, then relayed his plan. "We can use the fissure. That's where the wasp thing came from, so that's technically where these are from too. If we put them back in there, they'll return to whatever their fifth dimensional form is, right? And then they won't stay attached to Drew anymore." He ended with a look at Crystal for confirmation. She concurred. "That's how I got rid of the wasp, actually. It happened sort of accidentally, but it worked." "What about the, time problem?" Reese asked. "I have no idea what any of you are talking about," said Rose. Ignoring her for a moment, Crystal said, "We already talked about this, remember? Being anchored here stops the time dilation from affecting you. It only becomes a problem if you're adrift on the other side like what happened to me. But if we all do this together, if we can get him through there safely, we might be able to stop these things from leeching on him before it's too late." "Rose, how far away are the medics?" Reese asked. Rose shrugged, then said, "I called them before I drove here, but they come from the hospital in South Bend. Our officers might be in the woods already, but the ambulance could be another, maybe as much as 20 minutes. Drew groaned, the sound fading to a waning gasp at the end. Crystal gritted her teeth. "Are we doing this?" "We have to at least try," replied Darian. Rose shook her head, saying, "I still don't understand, but I trust you, Crystal. Just tell me what to do." Crystal picked up Drew's legs, and each of the Whitney brothers put one of his arms around their neck. Rose took up the rear, lifting Drew's head up as they carried him through the woods. If Rose was right, and the Proudie PD was already moving toward them, Crystal knew they needed to act quickly. If they were discovered before they reached the fissure, especially if Mike Labrie had come, they wouldn't be given the chance to save Drew. Adrenaline fueled them all the way there. Rose, who had not been prepared or warned about the way the fissure would make her feel, let go of Drew's head and turned away to vomit. Not so far away, they started hearing voices and radio chatter. "Rose, can you buy us a little time?" Crystal asked after they set Drew back down. Rose panted, then heaved again before saying, "I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know if I can—" "It's just the effects of the fissure," Darian assured her. "You'll feel better the further you get from it." "Is that the fissure?" she asked, pointing at the shimmering air. She received confirming nods from everyone. She said, "It's beautiful." Then, "I'll stall them, but I hope you know what you're doing. Be careful." Crystal thanked her, and Rose stumbled off toward the trail. "Who's going in with him?" Reese asked. Darian said, "It was my idea. I'll do it." "You can't hold on to him on your own. I'll go too," said Crystal. Whoa, how am I supposed to anchor you both here?" Reese asked. Everyone stopped to think for a moment. Darian spoke first. "We'll form a chain. Reese, you'll stay on this side and hold on to Drew's feet. Crystal and I will take one of his arms each and drag him through. Think that'll work, Crystal?" Looking at Drew's lax, graying face, Crystal said, "We have to try something fast, so sounds good to me." They all oriented Drew toward the humming fissure. Reese and Darian exchanged a quick hug, then took their positions. Crystal looked Darian in the eyes and said, "Do not let go." He nodded, and without further ado, they carried Drew through the fissure. They fell into a starless night sky. Infinite nothingness surrounded them on every side, but at Drew's feet, a small window remained open to the physical world. They could see Reese standing there holding on, like they were looking at him through a backwards telescope. "Can you hear me?" Crystal asked Darian. The words formed perfectly in her mouth. She heard them reverberate in her own head, but what left her lips were amorphous sound waves. Darian responded, but all Crystal heard were the same sounds reflected back to her. She thought, is this what it's like to talk in space? Then, is space the fifth dimension? Their purpose brought her mind back. Drew remained a solid figure in her hands, and thankfully it seemed the human chain idea had worked. She hadn't turned into a bodiless soul like her prior experience in the fifth dimension, and Darian didn't appear to be aging before her eyes. Continuing the trend of positive signs, the polyps covering Drew's skin began to fizzle and dissolve into drifting particles of light. The process occurred slowly, and Drew remained all but lifeless in their arms, but they waited patiently until the only trace of the polyps were dozens of red sores on his skin. Once the last polyps dissolved, Crystal looked at Darian to communicate it was time to go back, but before their eyes met, Darian expelled a sonic boom that even in the vacuum Crystal could interpret as alarm. Still clutching Drew with one hand, Darian pointed with his other at something behind her. She turned. There, somewhere in the infinite space, an indeterminable distance from them, a large figure made of purple light had emerged. It bore the basic figure of a human with broad shoulders. As Crystal and Darian watched, wispy purple tentacles grew from its back. Those broke into smaller tendrils of smoky purple energy and collected the spectral floating dust of the dissolved polyps. When every particle had been absorbed into what now resembled sprawling trees sprouting from the entity's back, the branches of tendrils began to retract back into it. Crystal and Darian's transfixion on the dark purple entity only increased when its massive arms rose above its head, fingers spread. It clenched its hands and pulled its arms inward as if attempting to pull down the sky. Darian sensed urgency from Crystal and turned his eyes to her. She pointed at Reese, at the opening through which he clung to Drew. It had started to close. He looked back at the entity, which continued to pull with great power upon the invisible cords by which it controlled the intangible dimension. It was trying to close them off from the world, to trap them. As she started pushing Drew toward the closing hole, Crystal distantly wondered, is that the thing which brought the fissure back? Then, it collected the particles left of the embryos we returned to this place. Did they come from it originally? Darian helped her push. They could see Reese desperately tugging Drew back through the fissure. He wondered what the shuddering looked like from his brother's perspective. Reese seemed to sense something was wrong. There was a desperate purpose in his eyes as he pulled, and Darian pushed with Crystal right beside him. Suddenly, Reese was surrounded by blue uniforms. Men and women took hold of his arms and wrenched him away from Drew. Crystal and Darian tried to cry out to them, but their voices dissolved in the vacuum. Drew became heavy, and they felt themselves sinking into infinity. Formless colors started flashing in the corners of their vision. Crystal knew that Drew's legs were now all that tethered her and Darian to the tangible world. It was a loose bond, and it was beginning to slip. The hole was almost closed. They both wondered whether Drew would stay on Earth, be lost in the fissure with them, or be severed between the two worlds. The officers turned and began shouting at something behind them. None of them moved to intervene, though, when Rose Barnum burst through their ranks and took hold of Drew's feet. In the confusion, Reese broke free of those holding him and threw himself around Drew's waist. Together, he and Rose yanked the man through the portal. Darian and Crystal held on tightly and felt themselves lifted with him. The colors stopped flashing, and within seconds, they landed beside each other on the rough floor of the Proudie Woods. Their heads filled once more with the hum of the fissure, but it only lasted a moment. Before they could even rise to their knees, the fissure vanished, and the woods were filled only with the shouting voices of the officers and paramedics surrounding them. Drew would make a full recovery. Crystal tallied this in the sparse column of positive outcomes that followed her second foray into the fifth dimension. Tallied against the positives were the firing of Rose Barnum, her only loyal asset in local law enforcement, the brief goodbye she was forced to give the Whitney brothers so they could flee before Chief Labrie scrounged up charges to hit them with, and, of course, the memory of that enormous entity she'd witnessed destroying the fissure. Along with severing the tie to the paranormal world she had hoped to accomplish on her own terms, the entity had destroyed any chance she had of convincing Labrie or Proudie's mayor, Gina Ashford, that the town was in imminent danger. Despite the closure of the fissure, she still felt the town was at risk. And now, she looked crazier than ever. Rose couldn't help her, and she'd been pinned with responsibility for the near death of a well-known, if widely derided, local man. Yet, despite the trials she knew she was yet to endure, both figurative and potentially literal, Crystal felt more determined than ever to see her circumstantially assigned mission to the end. The Whitney brothers had not fled in cowardice. They'd not abandoned her to whatever fate the local jurisdiction had in store for her. They'd left her with a promise. They'd told her, through their years of paranormal dealings, they'd met a few people they thought could help explain, understand, and potentially confront the evil power that lurked in the intangible dimension near Crystal's home. "I know we started off talking about how this might be bigger than you guys realize," Crystal had told them, "but now it's undeniable. This might be something existentially dangerous." "I agree," Darian had said. Reese then added, "And that's why we can't let you face it alone." Darian had turned and opened his car door, but before he got in, he embraced Crystal. And though she normally hated hugs, Crystal had squeezed him back. She'd needed him to know how important she felt he and his brother were to her before they left. Before he let go, Darian had told her, "Don't worry, hang in there. We'll see you again." You made it out. Congratulations. If you enjoyed the story, please rate, like, review, or subscribe. For early, ad-free episodes and behind-the-scenes episodes I call Into the Woods, become a patron at patreon.com/thewarningwoods. You can also support the show by purchasing merch. The merch store and Patreon links are in this episode's description. To stay up to date, follow me on Instagram and TikTok at The Warning Woods. And when you feel ready, meet me here for another journey into the Warning Woods. Thank you for listening.